There is a very specific kind of fear that only hits you when you realize that a mathematical impossibility is staring you right in the face in your own front yard. I was standing in my dark living room, clutching a mug of lukewarm cocoa, looking out at the 6 life-sized wooden nutcrackers I had lined up along my porch. I knew for a fact, with every fiber of my being, that I had only bought 6 of them because they were $90 each and I didn't want to spend more than $500 plus tax. But as the moonlight hit the porch, I counted them again, and my heart dropped into my stomach because there were 7 painted faces looking back at me through the glass. It started as a normal Tuesday in December, a week before the neighborhood's annual Light Up the Block contest. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac where the biggest drama is usually someone forgetting to pick up their mail, so I never felt the need to lock my gate during the day. My house is set back from the road, surrounded by thick pine trees that make the property feel private. But that night, the privacy felt like a trap. I had spent the afternoon positioning those massive nutcrackers. Each one stands 6 feet tall and weighs a ton, making them a nightmare to move alone. I remember the physical strain of sliding them into a perfect row, 3 on the left of the door and 3 on the right. The sun went down around 5 and the freezing rain started shortly after, turning the world into a gray, blurred mess. I was exhausted and ready to go to sleep, but I noticed one of the motion sensor lights in the yard had triggered. I walked to the window to see if a deer had wandered onto the lawn, but nothing was moving. That was when I did the count. 1, 2, 3 on the left. 4, 5, 6, 7 on the right. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the drafty windows. Why was there an extra soldier on my porch? I stood there for a long time, my eyes straining to find the difference between them in the shadows. They all looked identical from the back of the house, with their stiff red jackets, black boots, and those wide, frozen grins painted onto their wooden faces. I thought maybe a neighbor had played a prank on me, or perhaps my husband had bought an extra one as a surprise and forgotten to mention it. But my husband was in Chicago on a business trip, and the gate to the driveway was latched shut. If someone had put that 7th nutcracker there, they had to have carried a 100-pound wooden statue across a muddy yard in total silence. I reached for the light switch to flood the porch with the high-intensity LEDs, but when I flipped the toggle, nothing happened. My stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. I tried the hallway light, then the kitchen light. Nothing. The power wasn't out in the neighborhood because I could see the glowing blue icicle lights on the house across the street. Someone had pulled the exterior breaker on the side of my house. They wanted me in the dark, and they wanted me to know that they were right outside the door. I backed away from the window, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps that seemed far too loud in the empty house. I needed to find my phone, but I realized I had left it charging in the kitchen, which was at the back of the house, far away from the front door. As I turned to run for it, I heard a sound that made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't a loud noise, just a slow, heavy thud. The sound of something heavy being placed down on wood. I froze in the middle of the hallway, my eyes darting toward the front door. Through the frosted glass panels on the side of the entrance, I saw a shadow move. One of the nutcrackers was no longer in the line. I could see the silhouette of a tall, stiff figure standing directly in front of the door handle. It wasn't a statue. The 7th one hadn't been made of wood at all. It was a person in a costume, a person who had stood perfectly still for hours, waiting for the lights to go out and for me to be alone. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Whoever was out there had watched me set up the decorations. They had probably been standing there while I was adjusting the other statues, mimicking their pose, holding their breath while I walked past them to go inside. My mind raced through the possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Was it a robbery, or was it something much more personal and sick? I heard the doorknob rattle. It was a slow, deliberate turn, as if the person on the other side was testing the strength of the lock. I thank God every day that I had decided to engage the deadbolt earlier that evening. When the door didn't open, there was a long silence. I stood in the dark, clutching a heavy metal flashlight I had grabbed from the hall closet, my knuckles white from the pressure. I kept asking myself, What are they waiting for? Why don't they just break the glass? Then, the scratching started. It sounded like someone was taking a blade or a sharp tool and dragging it across the wooden door. It was a rhythmic, agonizing sound that felt like it was happening inside my own skull. I finally gathered the courage to move toward the kitchen, staying low to the floor so I wouldn't be seen through the windows. I reached the counter and fumbled in the dark for my phone, my fingers trembling so hard I almost dropped it. I dialed 911, my voice a frantic whisper as I explained to the operator that there was a man dressed as a decoration trying to get into my house. It sounded insane as I said it out loud, like something out of a bad movie, but the operator stayed calm and told me the police were on their way. She told me to find a room with a lock and stay there. I ran to the master bedroom, locked the door, and pushed the heavy oak dresser in front of it. While I waited, the house was silent again, which was almost worse than the scratching. I kept imagining him moving around the perimeter of the house, looking for a window that wasn't latched or a basement door I had forgotten to check. I heard the floorboards on the porch creak one last time, a heavy, dragging sound, and then nothing but the wind. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, their sirens and flashing blue lights felt like the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I pushed the dresser back and met them at the door, my heart still hammering against my ribs. They searched the entire property with high-powered spotlights, but the man was gone. On the porch, they found the 6 wooden nutcrackers I had bought, but the 7th one was missing. In its place, right where it had been standing in front of my door, was a pile of red felt and a plastic mask with a painted-on grin. Beside the mask, there was a small, handwritten note scrawled on a piece of cardboard. It simply said, "Thanks for letting me join the line. I'll pick a different house tomorrow." The police found that the person had used a professional-grade glass cutter to start a circle in my front window, but the arrival of the patrol car must have scared them off just seconds before they could reach through and unlock the deadbolt. I didn't sleep for a week after that. I took down every single decoration and packed them away in the attic. Now, every year when Christmas rolls around, I keep my yard empty and my lights off, because every time I see a life-size decoration in someone's yard, I can't help but count them twice, wondering if one of them is waiting for the lights to go out. The most dangerous thing about being 30 feet up a ladder at night isn't the height, but the realization that someone on the ground is holding your life in their hands. I was standing on the very last safe rung of my extension ladder, stretching to hook a string of heavy C9 LED bulbs onto the gutter of my 2-story colonial. The wind was biting at my ears, and the only light came from the dim glow of the street lamp at the end of the driveway. I remember thinking how quiet the neighborhood felt, almost like the world had been muted by the frost. I had been working for 3 hours to get the roofline perfect because I wanted the house to look exactly like the ones in the magazines. My wife and kids were inside watching a movie, and the sound of muffled laughter occasionally drifted through the glass of the upstairs window. I felt a sense of peace until the first tug happened. It was subtle, just a slight tension on the strand of lights I was holding in my left hand. I figured the cord had simply gotten snagged on a bush or a lawn ornament below me. I gave the line a gentle shake to free it, but instead of loosening, the cord tightened with a sudden, violent jerk. The force was so unexpected that my boots slipped an inch on the aluminum rung, and I had to wrap my arms around the top of the ladder to keep from tumbling backward into the darkness. I looked down over my shoulder, squinting into the shadows of the bushes at the base of the house. I couldn't see anything but the dark shapes of the boxwoods, yet the line was still taut, pulled tight toward the side of the garage where the power outlet was located. "Hey, cut it out!" I shouted, thinking it was my son playing a prank or perhaps a neighbor being annoying. There was no response, just the sound of the wind whistling through the pine trees. I waited for a moment, my heart starting to thud a little faster against my ribs. I reached back out to continue clipping the lights, but as soon as I touched the wire, I felt a heavy, rhythmic vibration coming up the line. It felt like someone was wrapping the cord around their hand and slowly, methodically leaning back with their full body weight. My ladder began to creak. The top of it started to slide an inch to the left, grating against the metal gutter with a sound that made my teeth ache. I realized then that the person below wasn't just pulling the lights. They were using the lights as a tether to pull the ladder away from the house. If they pulled hard enough, the top of the ladder would clear the edge of the roof, and I would be sent into a freefall onto the concrete driveway below. I tried to let go of the light strand, but the wire had somehow looped around my wrist during my earlier scramble to stay upright. As the person below gave another massive heave, the wire bit into my skin, pinning my arm against the side of the ladder. I was trapped, suspended in the air, and I could feel the center of gravity shifting. I looked down again, and this time, I saw a figure emerge from the darkness of the garage. They weren't wearing a festive hat or a coat. They were dressed in dark, industrial work clothes, and they were staring up at me with a look of cold, calculated focus. They didn't say a word. They just gripped the thick green extension cord with both hands and started to walk backward, away from the house. The ladder groaned under the pressure, the feet of it sliding a few inches across the frozen driveway. I screamed for my wife, but the windows were double-paned and the television was too loud. To them, I was just a silhouette against the moon, finishing the chores. To the person below, I was a target in a game of physics. I knew that if the ladder fell, I wouldn't just break a leg. At this height, and with the way the ladder would collapse under me, it would be fatal. The intruder stopped pulling for a second, looking at me as if they were savoring the moment of my realization. Then, they reached into their pocket and pulled out a long, folding utility knife. They weren't going to pull me down anymore. They were going to cut the tension while I was leaning into it, causing the ladder to kick back and lose its footing. I had to act within seconds. My right hand was free, and I reached into my tool belt, fumbling past the plastic clips and the electrical tape until my fingers closed around my heavy pliers. I didn't try to hit the person, as they were too far away. Instead, I focused on the strand of lights that was pinning my left wrist. I used the wire cutters on the pliers to snip through the thick, insulated cord just as the intruder lunged forward to slash at the line. The sudden release of tension caused the ladder to lurch violently against the house. I slammed my chest into the rungs, knocking the wind out of me, but I didn't fall. The intruder, who had been leaning his entire weight into the pull, stumbled backward and fell hard onto the icy pavement. I didn't wait to see if he was hurt. I slid down the ladder with a speed that burned the palms of my hands, my boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. I didn't turn to face him. I knew he was getting back up, and I could hear the scrape of his boots on the gravel. I bolted for the side door of the garage, fumbling with my keys in the dark. I could hear him behind me, his breathing heavy and ragged, his footsteps getting closer with every second. I shoved the key into the lock, turned it, and threw myself inside, slamming the deadbolt home just as a heavy weight thudded against the other side of the door. The handle rattled violently for nearly a minute. I stood in the dark garage, clutching a garden rake as a makeshift weapon, my whole body shaking so hard I could barely stand. Eventually, the rattling stopped. I crept to the small, high window of the garage and looked out. The ladder was lying flat on the driveway, shattered into two pieces. The extension cord had been neatly coiled and left right in the center of the pavement, like a grim calling card. When the police arrived, they found footprints leading into the woods behind my house, but the trail went cold at the creek. They told me that there had been a string of ladder falls in the next county over that had been ruled as accidents. Now, I look at those beautiful, glowing houses in the neighborhood and I don't see Christmas cheer. I see 100 different ways for someone to hide in the shadows, waiting for you to climb just a little too high. I never go up on the roof anymore. My house stays dark, and my doors stay locked. There is a specific primal fear that kicks in when you realize the darkness surrounding your house isn't a technical failure, but a deliberate choice made by someone standing just out of sight. It was 2 days before Christmas, and the temperature had plummeted so low that the moisture from my breath was freezing on the collar of my coat. I was sitting in my living room when the outdoor display suddenly died. All the cheerful multicolored lights that wrapped around my porch and the glowing reindeer in the yard vanished, leaving nothing but the oppressive velvet blackness of the woods that border my property. I sighed, thinking it was just a blown fuse from the heavy frost, and I headed to the side of the house to reset the outdoor breaker. The snow crunched under my boots, a loud, lonely sound in the stillness of the night. I reached the gray metal box, flipped the switch, and watched as the yard flooded with light again. I didn't think twice about it until I walked back inside, and 10 minutes later, the lights flickered twice and died for the second time. A slight prickle of unease crawled up my spine as I looked out the window. The streetlights were fine, and my neighbors' houses were glowing brightly, so I knew the grid wasn't the problem. I went back outside, my flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the freezing air. This time, when I got to the breaker box, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. The heavy plastic cover wasn't just hanging open. There were fresh, muddy fingerprints on the cold metal surface. Someone had been standing exactly where I was standing only minutes ago. I stood perfectly still, listening to the woods. The silence was so heavy it felt like it was pressing against my eardrums. I told myself it was probably just a neighborhood kid messing around, but the logic didn't sit right in my stomach. Why wait for me to go back inside just to trip it again? I flipped the breaker back on, but as I turned to head for the front door, I saw a green extension cord snaking across the snow that I didn't recognize. It wasn't one of mine. It ran from the edge of my porch, trailing off into the deep shadows of the heavy pine trees at the edge of my lot. Curiosity, or perhaps just a stubborn need to know what was happening, led me to follow the cord. As I walked toward the tree line, the lights on my house began to strobing. On, off, on, off. It was rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I realized the person at the other end of that cord was watching me, playing with the power to draw me further away from the safety of my porch. I stopped walking, the beam of my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and fragile in the cold. There was no answer, but the strobing of the lights stopped, leaving the yard in total darkness once more. I heard a soft, metallic click from the direction of the trees. It was the sound of a heavy-duty staple gun. Someone was anchoring something to the trunks of the trees. I shined my light toward the sound, and the beam hit a pair of eyes reflecting back at me, low to the ground. For a second, I thought it was an animal until the figure stood up. It was a man, dressed entirely in dark, insulated coveralls, holding a bundle of white Christmas lights in one hand and a long, sharpened pry bar in the other. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. He began to walk toward me, not running, but moving with a slow, terrifying confidence that suggested he knew I had nowhere to go. I turned and bolted for the house, my boots slipping on the hidden patches of ice beneath the snow. I reached the porch and fumbled for my keys, my breath coming in ragged, panicked bursts. I could hear his footsteps behind me, steady, heavy thuds on the frozen ground. I made it inside and slammed the door, throwing the deadbolt and leaning my back against the wood, my chest heaving. I thought I was safe until I heard the hum of the outdoor power timer. Through the glass of the side window, I watched as the man reached the breaker box again. But he didn't trip the switch this time. Instead, I heard the screech of metal as he used the pry bar to rip the entire box off the side of the house, severing the main power line to my exterior security lights. The house plunged into a darkness so thick I couldn't even see my own hands. Then came the sound that haunted my dreams for months afterward. The sound of him wrapping that heavy green extension cord around the handles of my front door, looping it over and over again, tying me inside my own home. I heard him move to the back door, the cord scraping against the siding of the house as he dragged it along. He was tethering the exits, turning my house into a cage while he worked in the dark. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife I could find, then scrambled to the phone to call the police. As I waited for the operator to pick up, I heard the sound of glass shattering in the basement. He wasn't just locking me in. He was choosing his own way in. I realized the extension cord wasn't just a tool, It was a distraction to keep me focused on the doors while he found the weakest point of the house. I sprinted to the basement door and shoved a heavy kitchen chair under the handle just as the wood began to groan under the pressure of someone kicking it from the other side. I screamed that I had a gun and that the police were on their way, even though I was lying about the weapon. The kicking stopped abruptly. I stood there in the pitch black, listening to the sound of someone breathing heavily on the other side of the thin wooden door. The sirens appeared in the distance, the faint wail growing louder as the police sped toward my rural road. I heard the man retreat, the basement window clicking as he climbed back out into the night. When the officers arrived, they had to cut the extension cords off my front and back doors just to get inside to help me. The man had used industrial-grade wiring to lace the handles together, a trap designed to ensure that even if I had tried to run, I would have been stuck. They found a nest in the woods where he had been watching me for days. There were dozens of extension cords stolen from other houses in the neighborhood, all tangled together like a web. He hadn't been interested in the decorations. He was using the holiday chaos as a cover to scout which houses were easy to isolate. They never caught him, but they found his discarded coveralls a mile away.